Meet Tommy Grimes, a lad whose halo had a habit of slipping. One minute he's an angel, polishing his shoes, the next he's plotting mischief that would make a goblin blush. His dear mother, bless her heart, had one golden rule. "Tommy, stay on our street or Mr. Miacca will get you." Mr. Miacca. The name alone sent shivers down the spines of local youngsters, a veritable boogeyman famed for his peculiar appetite. But rules for a boy like Tommy were often seen as mere suggestions, especially when adventure whispered from around the forbidden corner. Tommy's street was, well, a street, perfectly nice with its colorful houses and window boxes brimming with flowers. But the corner, that was the gateway to the unknown. Whispers among the children painted it as the edge of the world, beyond which lay untold wonders and, of course, the lair of the infamous Mr. Miacca. Was he real, or just a scary story to keep kids in line? Tommy naturally was dying to find out. The mundane safety of his own street felt like a cage to his restless spirit. He yearned for the thrill. Mr. Miacca roughly pulled Tommy to his feet and shoved him through a creaky door into the gloomiest kitchen imaginable. A huge black cauldron bubbled menacingly over a fire, casting dancing, demonic shadows on the grimy walls. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations, and the air was thick with a strange, unidentifiable cooking smell. "Right then," Mr. Miacca said, rubbing his bony hands together, "let's have a proper look at tonight's main feature." He pulled Tommy further into the dim, flickering light of the fire. Mr. Miacca prodded Tommy's arm with a long, bony finger. "A bit scrawny, aren't we? Mostly elbows and knees." He then felt Tommy's legs. "You're rather tough," he declared, not unkindly, more like a chef assessing an ingredient. "But you're all I've got for supper, and you'll not taste bad boiled, I reckon. A little seasoning, perhaps." Tommy gulped, his mind racing. Boiled, seasoning, this was getting alarmingly specific. He had to think and think fast, or he'd end up as Miacca Chow. Suddenly Mr. Miacca slapped his forehead. "Body oh me, I forgot the herbs. Can't have boy stew without herbs, it'll be as bitter as a goblin's grumble." He peered around the grimy kitchen, then bellowed, "Sally, ho Sally! Where's that wife of mine?" His voice echoed through the creepy house. Tommy's heart leaped. A wife, maybe she was kinder, or maybe she was in charge of dessert, which given the main course was a terrifying thought. A door creaked open at the far end of the kitchen, and out shuffled Mrs. Miacca. She was short and plump, with a flour-dusted apron over a faded floral dress and spectacles perched on her nose. "What d'you want, my dear?" she asked, her voice surprisingly mild. "Busy with my baking." "Ah, Sally, my love," said Mr. Miacca. "Here's a little boy for supper, a bit on the tough side, but beggars can't be choosers. Only I've clean forgotten the herbs. Mind him, will ye, while I pop out and get them?" "All right, my love," chirped Mrs. Miacca, surprisingly cheerful about the prospect of boy stew. "Don't be long now, the fire's just right." And with a pat on Tommy's head that felt more like a preliminary tenderizing, Mr. Miacca grabbed a small basket and scurried out the door, leaving Tommy alone with the rather more approachable-looking Mrs. Miacca. This was his chance. He just needed to find the right words, and fast, before those herbs arrived. Tommy, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice, decided a bit of polite conversation wouldn't go amiss. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miacca," he began, "but does Mr. Miacca, always have little boys for supper?" He tried to make it sound like a casual inquiry, as if discussing the weather. Mrs. Miacca, who was now absent-mindedly stirring the contents of the cauldron with a very large ladle, nodded. "Mostly, my dear," she said cheerfully. "If little boys are bad enough and get in his way, you see." Tommy's mind raced. He needed a weakness, a chink in the Miacca culinary armor. And don't you have anything else but boy meat?" he ventured. "No pudding, for instance?" At the word pudding, Mrs. Miacca's eyes lit up behind her spectacles like a pair of freshly polished sixpences. "Ah, pudding," she sighed, a dreamy expression on her round face. "I loves pudding. Jam roly-poly, spotted dick, treacle tart, but it's not often the likes of me gets pudding, more's the pity. Jackpot." Tommy seized the opportunity like a starving dog pounces on a sausage. "Why, Mrs. Miacca," he exclaimed, his voice full of feigned surprise and generosity, "my mother is making a huge pudding this very day. A magnificent plum pudding swimming in custard, and I am absolutely certain she'd give you a generous slice, perhaps even two, if I were to ask her nicely. Shall I run and fetch some for you right now?" He held his breath. This was his ace in the hole. Mrs. Miacca's eyes widened further if that were possible. Plum pudding with custard, the temptation was clearly agonizing. "Oh my," she cooed. "A plum pudding, you say, from your dear mother?" She licked her lips. "Well now, that asterisk is a thoughtful boy you are." She hesitated for only a moment. "All right then, dearie, pop along and get it, but don't you be long, mind, and be absolutely sure to be back for supper." She winked, a gesture that was slightly less terrifying now. Tommy didn't need telling twice. "Oh, I'll be super quick, Mrs. Miacca, back before you can say plum pudding," he chirped, already backing towards the door, with a final, hopeful nod from the pudding-obsessed Mrs. Miacca. Tommy turned and fled. He didn't just run, he pelted, his little legs pumping like pistons, driven by the sheer, unadulterated terror of becoming Miacca stew and the glorious relief of his narrow escape. He didn't even glance back at the crooked, frowning house. For a while, Tommy played the part of the good boy with Oscar-worthy dedication. He helped his mum knead dough, making hilariously misshapen bread rolls. He even attempted to teach the neighbor's cat to fetch his slippers, an experiment that ended with a scratched nose and a very smug cat. But oh, the boredom, it gnawed at him like a tiny, persistent woodworm. His bright eyes would often drift towards that tantalizing corner, the forbidden path whispering his name. Goodness, it turned out, was exhausting work for a boy with adventure in his veins. He burst through his own front door, gasping for breath, a whirlwind of ginger hair and panicked eyes. His mother, Mary, who was indeed baking, though it was bread, not pudding, nearly dropped her rolling pin. "Tommy, good heavens, child. What on earth happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tommy, between ragged breaths, poured out his terrifying tale of Mr. Miacca, the sack, the cauldron, and his daring pudding ploy. His mother listened, her face growing paler with every word, then hugged him tightly. For many a long day after that, Tommy Grimes was the model of a good boy. He stuck to his own street like glue, helped his mother without much complaint, and even did his homework before being asked. The memory of Mr. Miacca's hungry eyes and Mrs. Miacca's cauldron was a powerful deterrent. The forbidden corner held no allure, only the phantom smell of boy stew. He shuddered every time he even thought about it. Adventure, he decided, was highly overrated when it came with a side of mortal peril. But as they say, time heals all wounds, or at least dulls the edges of terrifying memories. Weeks turned into months. The sun shone, birds sang, and the immediate threat of being boiled alive began to fade. Tommy's adventurous spirit, long suppressed, started to twitch. The familiar itch to explore, to see what lay beyond the known, began to resurface. His own street, once a haven, now felt a little too small, a little too predictable. Corner started whispering his name again, softly at first, then more insistently. This time it wasn't a kite, it was a challenge. Billy the Bruiser Boulder, the toughest kid on the street, dared him. "Bet you're too chicken to go round Miacca's corner now, Grimes," he taunted, a crowd of other children watching. Tommy's pride, a fragile thing at the best of times, bristled. Chicken, him, the boy who'd faced Mr. Miacca and lived to tell the tale, sort of. The dare, combined with his own resurgent curiosity, was a potent cocktail. He had to prove he wasn't scared, even if he secretly was. Tommy hesitated for a moment, the memory of the burlap sack and the bubbling cauldron flashing in his mind. His mother's warnings echoed, but then he saw Billy's smirk, heard the snickers of the other children. Taking a deep breath, he puffed out his chest. "Course I'm not scared," he declared with far more bravado than he felt, and with a defiant glare at Billy, he turned on his heel and marched with deliberately confident strides straight towards that fateful, forbidden corner. Oh, Tommy, not again. He'd barely rounded the corner, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs, when a familiar, chilling voice rasped, Well, well, if it isn't my little runaway pudding fetcher. Did you bring Mrs. Miacca her treat this time?" Tommy froze mid-stride. There, leaning against the grimy wall as if he'd been waiting all along, was Mr. Miacca. His grin was wider, his eyes glintier. "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, let's just say supper will be extra satisfying tonight." This time there was no chase. Mr. Miacca, clearly having learned from their previous encounter, moved with lightning speed. Before Tommy could even yelp, he was snatched up. No pleasantries, no casual prodding. Just a swift, efficient scoop, and once again the world went dark and scratchy as he was thrust back into that dreaded burlap sack. "Oh no, not again," wailed Tommy from inside, his voice muffled. Mr. Miacca just chuckled. Indeed again, and this time no detours for forgotten ingredients, my boy. Back in the Miacca residence, the atmosphere was decidedly less hospitable. Mr. Miacca, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, dropped Tommy, still in the sack, onto the dusty kitchen floor with a thud. "Ah, you're the youngster what served me and my missus that shabby trick, leaving us without any supper," he growled, pulling Tommy out. "You won't be doing that again, my lad. I'll watch over you myself this time, every single second." His grin was not reassuring. Mr. Miacca gestured towards a dilapidated old sofa in the corner of the kitchen. "Right then, under you go," he commanded. "Get under the sofa, and I'll sit on it to make sure you don't go wandering off to fetch any more imaginary puddings. Then I'll watch the pot boil for you, nice and slow." Poor Tommy, trembling, had no choice but to creep under the dusty, cobweb-laden sofa. Mr. Miacca promptly plunked himself down on top, his considerable weight making the springs groan ominously. And so began the longest, most terrifying wait of Tommy's young life. Trapped under the sofa, with Mr. Miacca's heavy boots just inches from his nose, Tommy listened to the crackle of the fire and the sinister bubbling of the cauldron. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mr. Miacca hummed his dreadful stew and pies tune. Tommy, desperate, scanned his cramped prison. His eyes fell upon one of the sofa's wooden legs. It was loose, wobbly, and looked surprisingly leg-like. An idea, wild and desperate, sparked in his mind. Then came the great kite incident. Not just any kite, mind you, but a magnificent crimson dragon, a masterpiece of paper and string Tommy had spent weeks crafting. On its maiden voyage, a mischievous gust of wind, probably in cahoots with Mr. Miacca himself, snatched the dragon and whisked it, you guessed it, right around that perilous corner. Tommy stood aghast, his masterpiece. His fire-breathing beauty, it was a test, a cruel, taunting invitation from fate itself. Could he resist? Could he let his dragon be lost forever? Mr. Miacca, however, was not a patient man. The delicious aroma from the pot was making him restless. "HMPH, this is taking too long," he grumbled, shifting his weight on the sofa. "I'm not going to wait any longer for the whole of you to cook. Here, you under there," he barked. "Put out your leg, just one little leg will do to start. I'll stop your giving us the slip this time, for sure." Tommy's blood ran cold. This was it, but his desperate plan was ready. Taking a shaky breath, Tommy did as he was told, sort of. With trembling hands, he carefully detached the loose wooden leg from the sofa and, heart-hammering, slowly pushed it out from under the dusty valance. From Mr. Miacca's vantage point, it probably looked convincing enough, a skinny, brown protuberance. Tommy squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the worst, hoping against hope that his desperate gamble would pay off. This was either genius or the stupidest thing he'd ever done. Mr. Miacca peered at the proffered leg. "Ah, there we go," he cackled. He reached for a hefty meat chopper that was conveniently lying nearby. With a grunt and a swift, decisive whack, he brought the chopper down. There was a dull thud. "Got it," he exclaimed triumphantly, holding up the severed sofa leg. He didn't seem to notice its distinct lack of blood or screaming. "Into the pot you go, my little drumstick," and he tossed the wooden limb into the bubbling cauldron. Having tenderized his supper, Mr. Miacca suddenly remembered his wife. "Sally, my dear, Sally," he bellowed. "Come see, supper's nearly ready, got a lovely bit in the pot already." Silence, no cheerful reply from Mrs. Miacca. "Sally," he called again, a little annoyed. "Drat that woman, probably fallen asleep in her pantry again." Grumbling, Mr. Miacca heaved himself up from the sofa and stomped off into the next room to find her, leaving the kitchen momentarily unattended. This was Tommy's cue. The nanosecond Mr. Miacca was out of sight, Tommy scrambled out from under the sofa, heart pounding like a runaway train. He didn't pause, didn't look back at the cauldron with its new woody ingredient. He shot across the kitchen, fumbled with the rickety door latch, and burst out into the gloomy twilight. He ran like the wind, like his trousers were on fire, like Mr. Miacca himself was breathing down his neck with a salt shaker. He ran all the way home, and this time he learned his lesson, for good. Resist, Tommy, ha! The desire to rescue his beloved dragon kite overwhelmed all of his mother's warnings. With a determined glint in his green eyes, Tommy squared his little shoulders. He cast a furtive glance back at his peaceful street, then, heart pounding like a drum solo, he darted round the corner and into the shadowy alleyway. The air immediately felt colder, the light dimmer. This was it. He was officially out of the street, in prime Miacca territory. The thrill was electric, tinged with a delicious shiver of fear. Tommy was so focused on his kite, tangled mockingly in the branches of a gnarled, spooky tree, that he didn't notice the shadow. A very tall, very thin shadow that seemed to detach itself from the gloom of the alley. Suddenly, a voice like rusty hinges creaked. "Well now, what have we here? A little bird flown too far from the nest." Tommy spun around, his blood turning to ice. Looming over him was a figure even more terrifying than the playground legends suggested. Mr. Miacca in the flesh, and he looked peckish. Tommy didn't need a second invitation to understand he was in deep, deep trouble. "Run!" His brain screamed, and for once his legs obeyed instantly. He bolted, a ginger blur against the grimy alley walls, but Mr. Miacca, despite his gangly appearance, moved with unnatural speed. His long legs covered the ground in a few swift strides. Tommy could hear heavy footsteps thudding close behind, accompanied by a chilling chuckle. "Not so fast, my little appetizer. The main course shouldn't try to escape the cutlery." Alas, Tommy's little legs were no match for Mr. Miacca's predatory pursuit. Just as a sliver of hope in the bright street corner appeared ahead, a large, surprisingly strong hand clamped down on his shoulder. Then, whoosh. Tommy found himself unceremoniously stuffed headfirst into a rough, smelly burlap sack. It was dark, scratchy, and smelled faintly of old potatoes. And was that fear? "Gotcha!" cackled Mr. Miacca from outside the sack. "Snug as a bug in a rug, or a boy in a bag soon to be in my tum." The journey to Mr. Miacca's house was a symphony of bumps, thuds, and the unsettling squelch of mud underfoot. Tommy, tossed about like a sack of particularly naughty potatoes, tried to make sense of his surroundings through the rough weave of the burlap. He could hear Mr. Miacca humming a jaunty, off-key tune about stews and pies. Occasionally, the bag would swing wildly, and Tommy would get a dizzying, upside-down glimpse of gnarled trees and a sky growing steadily darker. This was not the adventure he'd envisioned. Finally, with a particularly jarring thump, the sack was dropped. Tommy heard a rusty gate creak open, then the crunch of footsteps on a gravel path. Mr. Miacca muttered something about home sweet home. When the sack was finally lifted, Tommy, blinking in the dim light, found himself deposited on a dusty floor. He looked up and saw Mr. Miacca's house, a crooked, teetering structure that looked like it was actively trying to frown. Ivy clawed at the walls, windows were like vacant eyes, and a wisp of ominous smoke curled from a leaning chimney.